Hello and welcome to another Overlord theory video, and today I want to take a look at how the potential conflict between the Sorcerer Kingdom of Ainz Ooal and the Slane Theocracy could play out. And as you probably have guessed already, this will be a what-if scenario in advance of the actual 15th volume of Overlord. So please understand that while all of my hypotheses are based on the lore of Overlord itself, how the conflict could play out is just based on my thoughts and ideas. And it will be interesting to come back to this video after the 15th volume has been dropped. But before we're going to take a look at this, let's take a look at my Patreons and thank them for supporting this channel, as well as all users of the YouTube thanks function who made one-time donations. And with that said, let's dive into it. After Ainz Ooal and Aura and Mara have left their kingdom in order to take a holiday in the Elven Kingdom, they were escorted by the freed elves of Area Usrud, who by now have become formidable fighters thanks to some training in advance. As they made their way into the kingdom, huge crowd formed around the Sorcerer King, and more precisely, the two elven royalties that accompanied him. For the elves, especially in this dire time, where the Theocracy of Slane has waged 100 years of war against the Elf Kingdom, seeing the stark elf princes and the princess being brought to them sparked a flame of hope that the war might not only end, but in fact take a turn for the better. And while Ainz fought back his social anxiety because he isn't used to be surrounded by hundreds of beautiful elven women, the Elf King takes notice about the Sorcerer King and his supposed gifts to him, and arranged for a meeting and a grand festivity to celebrate this event. But Ainz, now having heard stories about why the Elf King sends only women to fight off the Slane Theocracy's advance, grew worried about the king's intention, and decided to sneak into the palace after casting the high-tier hiding spell Perfect Unknowable, which turns him invisible, taste, smell, and soundless. Meanwhile, the Elf King in his throne room was eagerly awaiting the offering of the Sorcerer King, so that he may join forces with him to crush the Slane Theocracy. But now he felt a presence, like he was being watched, and it was quite potent. Soon enough, he found out why, after casting a high-tier counter-camouflage spell, and he giggled to himself, quite amused about the servants of this pathetic undead, as he found himself surrounded by members of the Black Scripture. Laughing at the hubris of the Theocracy's elite force, he easily knocked back the attack of the strongest human in the Scripture, lazily deflects spells and incoming projectiles shot at him from 3 different sides, only to be caught off guard by an attack from the back. While being in retirement for 20 years, one former member of the Black Scripture volunteered to wield the downfall of castle and country, the mind-controlling world item of the Slane Theocracy. But he wasn't originally able to use this kind of item. The only reason he could even get this one use out of it was because a grand ritual had been used on him, with not only the life force of the remaining Miku priestesses spent, as well as his own completely expended. He now crumbled to dust, with a smile on his face and peace in his heart. With the Elf King captured, the need to use Zesshi or someone elf of godly blood has now abated, and Platinum wouldn't get involved into the war after all. And while the Black Scripture now retreated back to Slane, other units of the Theocracy would take their place and finally destroy the hated elves completely, while the Elf King would be repurposed to fight another problem, the Sorcerer King of Ainz Ooal himself, this time with backup. In the now silent throne room, anger, hate, and hot-burning desire for revenge lingered in the air, as Ainz had witnessed who mind-controlled and collected powerful entities for their very own purposes. Just like they did now with the Elf King, the Slane Theocracy must also have tried to abduct Shaltir Bloodfallen back during this very fateful night. Now knowing who had tried to steal the child of Peroroncino, Ainz and his minions scoured the palace of the Elf King for any intelligence on the Theocracy, while also bringing in additional forces via the gate spell. Soon enough, Aura and Mare would be proclaimed as the new rulers of the Elven Kingdom, while Demiurge and Albedo would pull the strings behind his government. At this point, Ainz had already won the war of information. All he now needed to do was act on what he had learned, and the revenge he so eagerly desired would be his, after analyzing the records of the Elf King. Alongside a huge list of women who were all deemed to be worthless, except of that one godkin, he formed an insidious plan. And the first step to enact revenge would be to locate and take the Theocracy's most cherished members, the Godkins. Those who ruled the land should suffer the same pain he had. He would use their god's very offspring to bring the Theocracy down. Once Demiurge and Albedo approved of his plan, and Neuronist readied the other of the 5 worst, the Pleiades battlemates, led by Sebas and accompanied by Pistonia, arrived in the now leaderless kingdom, while Aura and Mare were, after some display of their power, acknowledged as the undisputed leaders of the Elf Kingdom. And while they in turn enacted policies of Albedo and Demiurge, Ainz rallied and reinforced the Pleiades battlemates, and separated them in pairs of 2, for the first step of his plan to succeed. Now with that said, let's dive into the plot, from the perspective of a member of the Adventurer Guild and his team, who were saved by the Slane Theocracy from the wrath of Ainz Ooal and smuggled out of the doomed kingdom of Riestais during the events of the 14th novel. He and his teammates were accompanying the forces of Slane to finally finish off the hated elves. While originally reluctant to go that deep into this unknown forest during times of war, once meeting the formidable knights of Slane, and more importantly, one of the scriptures leading the advance, as well as learning that they could keep any elves they captured, the adventurers were ultimately persuaded into aiding mankind in this dire hour of need. And while they had fought off or rather survived an elven ambush, and a fierce fire spell nearly killed them, they nonetheless managed to capture the 3 elves that attacked them. And while the spear tip of the army was penetrating the elven defenses, the former adventurers were eager to enjoy the spoils of war. And entrepreneuring merchants traveled with the advancing army to supply them with drinks, food, and an opportunity to sell off any of the elves captured. Any empty boxes of food large enough to accommodate an elf would eventually hold one before being transported back to Slane. And the merchant was also more than just happy to avoid carrying the empty boxes all the way back throughout the forest on a hastily constructed stage, more akin to a soapbox than anything akin to the furniture inside of a proper auction house. An adventurer group of Slane stepped forth and offered the 3 elves, pointing out how formidable they were, because they had almost killed them, while the merchant was not convinced. Besides, many other elves were lined up, so why would he pay a premium on them? If you think money is the price you will be paying today, all of you are gravely mistaken. One of the thus far silent elves spoke in such a harsh and condescending tone that the merchant, the adventurers, and even the other hundreds of elves lined up for sale had been speechless. While the merchant was used to being insulted by elves, they normally would do so out of hate and enrage and despair, not out of this smug sense of superiority. Now, believing that the adventurer's offer was more than just a sales pitch, the merchant whipped out a thorned whip to teach the elves in question some manners. And while the elves were supposedly quite strong, the merchant was a veteran of many battles who had served in the army, albeit that of Baharut. And he also fought in the amphitheatrum in Aventar a dozen times to get the funding necessary to start off his business, so he wasn't that concerned about a mouthy elf. Until her chains bursted under her efforts, and his whip had been stopped mid-air. The second elf now launched a bright flash of light that ascended even higher than the trees of the dense forest, thus signaling her location and the start of the counterattack. The elven battlemates now went into full assault mode, summoning not only their formidable armor, but also powerful weapons. A metal rod connected to a tank filled with oil, being expelled by the contraption and ignited by a tiny flame. The emerging burning hot tidal wave soon burned the onlookers, while another battlemate now whipped out not only armor, but 4 butterfly-like wings, seemed to be made up of pure light before sending and casting a 6-tiered spell, trapping the adventurers with fast-growing tree roots and vines, immobilizing them completely. Shortly after, a man dressed like a butler and maids dressed in armored maid uniforms showed up, seemingly out of nowhere, who then pursued any stragglers and hidden units still patrolling the forest, before a perfumed, painted, and upright walking squid had appeared with a smile on her face. Uranus turned to the adventurers and to the merchant before casting a message spell, informing her assistants to leave their own cages behind, since they had been so kind to bring their own holding cells with them. Meanwhile, in a secret meeting location deep in the forest of Top, a great hut to be more precise, the adventurer known as Mammon met with the higher-ups of the Slane Theocracy. Upon learning that he wished to ally himself with Slane and against the Sorcerer Kingdom, the faces of the 2 cardinals meeting the hero of humanity lit up brightly, until he had taken off his helmet. While Mammon couldn't be called good-looking even in a joking manner, his body was strong, and he might have been something that the Theocracy had looked for all along, a match for Zesshi, who values strength above all else. Mammon, while being surrounded by 3 beautiful maids, now revealed that he isn't allowed human contact, or even to take off his armor under any circumstances, and that the beautiful maids were in fact not human, but homunculi, because the Sorcerer King fears not only his strength, but also the potential of his offspring. Revealing that Ainz hoped to simply outlive him, he felt that the time has come to act. Arriving back at home, the 2 cardinals joined the others that were dealing with less opportune news. The spare tip of their army had been crushed and broken. The Elf King's army were supposedly broken and weak, disorganized, ripe for the capture, but instead they offered an unprecedented, fierce, and well-coordinated resistance. But with the Elf King captured, and Mammon allying himself with Slane, they now felt that Platinum couldn't match the might of the Theocracy, hence why they now felt comfortable enough to deploy Zesshi, so that she could finally enact her revenge. At the eve of the same day, Zesshi arrived in the Elven Kingdom and found something that delighted her. A strong opponent. Ainz, now knowing who had controlled Sheltier, enacted a plan of revenge, and in its first stage, Pandora's actor disguised as Mammon pretended to join the Theocracy against the Sorcerer Kingdom, while the Elfen and the regular battlemates were decimating the Slane Theocracy's troops in the Elf Kingdom. Wanting to finish the conflict quickly, Slane, now backed up by Mammon and the mind-controlled Elf King, has sent out Zesshi Zetsumai to this theater of war. Upon arriving in the forest of the Elven Kingdom, any elf could hear a certain voice. Starting off as a single quiet whisper, it would usually swell into a soft humming choir, whispering wisdom and guidance to any elf in need of it, as long as some of the elves would release a tiny bit amount of their mana in order to fuel the voices. And every elf of the kingdom could hear this collective choir. Known as the Green Tongue, it enabled the elves to coordinate over long distances, and while they had excellent sight, a better sense of smell than most humanoid species, and one of the finest, most acute sense of sound in the entire world, every word they utter, every noise they make, could reveal their position in the thick of the forest, with its high trees. Moreover, the voices could warn about an incoming threat. But while the once almost silent whispers had swelled into a full-blown warning cry, Mare found the sound just annoying at best and insulting at worst, considering they were warning about a vile undead. Upon finding himself disturbed while reading, he politely told him to please stay quiet, while Aura told him outright to shut up. But the third elf that couldn't be reached was perhaps the most endangered one. The desperate voices tried their best to warn the noble-blooded elfin princess of a grave danger, lurking in the woods, concealing her presence, lying in ambush. But Zesshi didn't even notice them, and it's not that Zesshi couldn't hear the word of the wood, because she was just a half-elf. It's because Zesshi couldn't be reached for the very same reason even a trader who stood right next to her and shouting into her very ear how great his pottery and his clay was, would also fail to reach the half-elf. Her mind was tuned to one thing and that one thing alone, but deaf to the rest of the entire world. Her next big fight. While she didn't know who was able to decimate the front line of Slane this fast, the small smoldering flame inside her heart reignited once more, fueled by the hope of finally fighting someone stronger than her, thus burning away any green tongue. On a high branch, her flame brightened even more, as she detected faint footsteps advancing towards her. To Zesshi, it didn't matter who the red-haired woman was, or from where she emerged. All that mattered was that she breathed her scepter in bright flames as she advanced towards her. The confidence the red-haired maid displayed put a twisted smile on Zeshi's face. Not being able to contain her excitement, she rushed forward in a mad dash, only for the maid to seemingly fail at deflecting her sight that now had opened up her belly, before she herself gets smacked down by the handle of the scepter, plummeting towards earth, before being intercepted by a branch as thick as a bell tower. The impact of Zesshi has broken the branch in two. From the underside of the impact center, Zesshi lazily evaded the falling branch and witnessed how the red-haired maid was now breathing herself in flame, and how her wound began to heal and disappear. A minute later, the battle-maid was bathed in dozens of augmentative spells, before rushing towards the half-elf girl that now had trouble blocking the fierce strikes coming from her. Now even more thrilled, and not wanting to give ground easily, Zesshi grabbed the burning hot scepter and punched the maid square in the face, before casting a healing spell herself that was ingrained in her gear, to also regenerate her burning skin and her health passively. A second later, Zesshi was dodging dozens of fire spells being flung at her with wild abandon. It looked more like a desperate gunner who was trying to down an airplane than anything resembling precision. Not only disappointed but slightly annoyed by this weak display, Zesshi fought for a moment seriously and rushed towards the battle-maid, deflecting 5 consecutive blows from her scepter and 2 from her fists and legs, before expanding her side, bathing it in bright blue light. In this night the full moon was put to shame by the half-cycle moon that Zesshi controlled, as the flesh of the red girl was peeled from her bones, and she was sent down to the ground, her healing fire having visible trouble replenishing so much lost health so quickly. Zesshi meanwhile rolled her eyes. She wasn't scared or angry, just annoyed that this one dared to interrupt her in her search for a strong opponent, because clearly she lacked the power to cause all of the 4 great claws left gashes upon the belly and chest area of the unattentive elf girl. Just a moment later, her head was situated between 2 burning jaws of a great wolf, biting down with full force. For a faint moment, hope reignited, before being smoked out again, because Zesshi, while deflecting the scepter and another of her great claw with her 2 hands, was easily able to not only break the jaw of the battle-maid, but to take it off from her head with a single well-placed kick. Now just disappointed, Zesshi froze time for just a moment, before separating the wolf's head from her body, not even a second later from the battle-maid's point of view, and minutes from Zeshi's. She was already traveling back, heading home, and wanting to do one and only one thing, telling all of the cardinals that next time her half-brother should suffice for such a trivial fight. The wood's desperate cry now changed into a sad mourning voice, as the real Lupus Regina emerged from her invisibility and casted a resurrection spell from a scroll that Ainz Ooal had given her and that Pestonia had instructed her with. With her greater doppelganger revived, the Doppellupus could take her place at the ever-expanding, ever-advancing front line, while she will join up with the rest of the Pleiades and much of the staff of the Great Tomb in order to watch the final battles over the hearts and minds of the Theocracy via the mirror of remote viewing, and while Lupus Regina, just like much of Nazarick, was watching an expanded version of the mirror of remote viewing in the amphitheatrum. All of them could witness a red bolt rushing forth, far more powerful and far more sinister than even the sadistic healer in a full moon night. For Sheltier would finally be allowed to take revenge. Zesshi was sent to kill the person responsible for all of this resistance. After a fight with the doppelganger version of Lupus Regina, she left for her home, bored and disappointed. And in her disappointed state, she had done something only those who are sure of their own power would do. She slept in the open, without protection, after eating her fill, eerily similar to her muscus behavior. But unbeknownst to her, she had been observed by another one. Before dawn, Sheltier would have caught up to her, ready and eager to attack, instructed to fulfill her part for the most cruel form of revenge. At the inner sanctum of a holy building in one of the Theocracy's cities, a dark knight met up with a black scripture. While the Sorcerer King was busy holding a parade, Momon, with whom the Undead King was at odds with, could slip away and participate in the briefing of the coming attack. With Zesshi already having sent word of her victory, and many more complaining about the pathetically weak opponent, the final phase of the plan could be enacted. As soon as Zesshi would return, the mind-controlled Elf King, Momon, the Black Scripture, and the Godkin herself would attack and publicly defeat the Sorcerer King, thus plunging his kingdom into chaos, while the demi-humans and heteromorphs would fight over the now leaderless kingdom. The adventurers saved from Ainz Ooal, as well as the other scriptures, would save the human population. After that, a major offensive would reconquer the lands lost and secure them for humanity, with the now largely unpopulated north of the former Riestal's kingdom serving as a buffer between the humans and the council state. Momon voiced his fascination by the plan. After all, it was his first time that he met up with the people who mind-controlled the vampire in front of the Sorcerer Kingdom's capital, whom he had fought and ultimately defeated. The Black Scripture in turn was delighted that Momon was truly powerful enough to actually destroy the vile beast and congratulated him, with the captain of the Black Scripture wanting to say his thanks to the face of the brave adventurer. As soon as the well-armored figure had taken off his helmet, the entirety of the scripture gawked at the white skull situated under it. Two small flames, dancing in the eye sockets, were facing down the Godkin. He didn't understand what was happening. Was this a trick, a cruel prank, or an illusion, meant to deceive the undead servants of the Sorcerer King and thus regain control over the lost territories even quicker? But a swift swing from a lightning-adored sword crashed all of these useless thoughts, as it had broken through the armor of the Godkin and buried itself deep into its flesh. The scripture now fully realized whom they were fighting, and they retreated to the other end of the room in order to launch a distant kind of attack, only to crash into the tall tower shields of Death Knights, who appeared seemingly out of nowhere, as Ainz dodged a retaliatory strike by the lance of the Black Scripture's captain, clad in the most holy and pure of beams. Ainz dropped the lightning-adored sword and summoned a lance of his very own, clad in utter darkness. With a precision strike, he bored it into the now unholy body of the godkin, making him go limp for a moment, before he rose again, paler, and with a far more sinister expression than before. Ainz had taken great care and great cost upon him to craft this replica of Shaltir's lance, while it wasn't in the divine tier of equipment. It surely sufficed to turn all of these weaklings into undead. But before he could bring the fight to the other scripture members, Ainz felt a presence. Someone, or rather something, was trying to take control of him, and as it failed, of one of his undead, which also failed equally. Now another dark night entered the chamber. As Ainz had thrown Pandora his lance, the undead king ventured into an adjacent room to confront the puppet master. And before the last member of the Black Scripture had been killed and enthralled as undead servants to the will of his majesty, this inferior undead fell silent, and then on his knees as well. Ainz, after having casted every augmentative spell he knows, as well as having visited Ainz Ooal to get blessed by her support spells as well, would not endure being spoken to by the people who mind-controlled Shaltir any longer. He was done even pretending to care for these vile aggressors. With ease he enacted his undead control over Soshana's first follower, as he ordered the now enthralled Rufus to spill every secret Slane and his gods, elders, and the scriptures held 6 elder-lich scribes were recording every word spoken. Meanwhile, Aura and Mare had the elves in their newly conquered kingdom prepare some special decoration, gifts, and clothings for the final act of Ainz Ooal's revenge, while Shaltir was finally catching up to Zesshi, who was still sleeping under the starry night sky. And as usual, Zesshi dreamt about finally meeting someone stronger than her, someone that was worthy of her. And like most nights, the dream started with a wild attack. This time, a white, shining Valkyrie had pierced her belly while she slept unguarded. It wasn't the first time she had this dream, but this time it felt much more realistic. Thus her reflexes kicked in and kicked her attacker square in the face, thus allowing her pinned body to move away. A quick healing spell had undone the worst of the damage, and now Zesshi would attack and slice the construct in front of her into 2. But this time, her attacker blocked her scythe with ease. A second hit from her lance entered her body and pierced her shoulder, before a well-placed kick from Zesshi put her on top of the very lance. Having gotten unusually excited by this lucid dream, Zesshi had activated a multitude of skills from her clothing and herself to boost her agility and movement speed, as well as activating the perpetual health regeneration spell her armor was blessed with. Running atop the lance of this shining white foe, she was surprised that her kicks were blocked, as well as another swing of her scythe, and that she suffered another blow, this time from the very fist of the Valkyrie and directly to her head. Blood mixed with tears of joy in her eyes as she realized that this dreadful angel of hers was real. Now flashing the maddest and cruelest of smiles, Zesshi activated Pure Heavenly Revenge, another skill from her armor, not in order to block the inevitable next attack, but to then mirror it with double the force. A lance mimicking that of her attacker appeared out of nowhere and hit Ainz with deadly precision, cutting deep into the construct, bringing her off balance, before Zeshi's scythe once more turned into the sickle of a moon, putting the fading celestial body to shame in both brightness and beauty. A quick swing sank into her enemy's armor, inflicting heavy damage. At an audience chamber deep at the heart of the Theocracy's sacrosanct buildings, Rufus had informed the cardinals of Zeshi's finding. As joyful as if Soshana himself had risen from the dead, only to then once more claim dominance over them, Rufus urged the cardinals and the pontifex to hastily visit this place of revelation. Inside a cathedral, on the outskirts of their city. Meanwhile, Zeshi's black and white color scheme now seemingly had added a third one. Her blood-sodden clothing was reflecting the first beam of light of this virgin day. Despite her bloodied outfit, her wounds had almost healed completely. Enjoying the first sunbeams, Zesshi felt sorrowful and sad that this defeated construct, now fading like the night sky, wasn't just a little bit stronger. Thus almost neglecting to sense a second angel of hers attacking. This one was blood red. And instead of the stoic face of the White Valkyrie, this one flashed a smile as wicked as her very own. Overcome with joy, Zesshi barely dodged the initial strike. Had she had a skill left to activate, she would have done so to start another attack. But she spent all of them defeating the bright shadow of their true enemy. But there was one final ace in Zeshi's sleeve that so far no one could best. She stopped the time and prepared a massive swing, only to find her aggressor moving away with ease and striking a perfect blow that would have normally punctured every artery in her neck. Only the time stop saved her. How exciting. Animated like never before, Zesshi rushed forward and brought in one swing after another before the Valkyrie even realized that even in this frozen second both of them were in. She could still suffer damage, while Zeshi's wounds would continue to heal. The cardinal stood inside of a cathedral, adorned with the most beautiful of flowers, but none of them could recollect having ever been to this place. But it looked just like many of the holy places they had visited before. And what's even more surprising was the smell of cake and dinner. Now jolly tunes could be heard, and this atmosphere charged with happiness. The cardinals almost neglected to realize that the entirety of the Black Scripture is already present and had taken a seat. The cardinals now believed that this could only mean one single thing: their gods would return. And as joy spread through their faces, they failed to notice the pale white faces of the scripture, as well as their blue lips. Zesshi couldn't believe it. Every time she heals her wounds during the time stop, it only prolonged the fight. As soon as she would leave the frozen second, the blood-red angel of hers would chip away at her health again, reducing it until only time stop could save Zesshi from certain defeat. Even worse, her adversary still had plenty of spells and skills, while her lance would heal any wound inflicted upon her by drawing on Zeshi's own health. With the godkin's mana almost completely spent, this could only mean one thing: that this beautiful angel of hers was indeed stronger than Zesshi, and thus deserving of her loyalty and her as a bride. During the last time stop Zeshi's depleted mana reserves could facilitate, she knelt before the Valkyrie, surrendering and then declaring her undying love for this undying angel, who upon leaving the frozen second changed briefly into a dress eerily similar to Downfall of Castle and Country, before changing into a white wedding gown as the sun set and the bells tolled. The cardinals watched in utter disgust as the profane evangelist, Nea Baraya, declared the strongest and last of their godkins married to this undead vampiric abomination, masquerading as a noblewoman. As Nea declared them wed in the name of Ainz Ooal and the Great Tomb of Nazarick, a kiss sealed the pact between the two. The entirety of the cathedral now applauded and cheered for this accursed union, throwing roses and cherry leaves on the floor where their fallen godkin and this accursed vampire walked. The Black Scripture, as well as the remaining Miku priestesses and the other higher-ups of Slane, were now overcome with happiness. And then, the entire scene started to play out anew. No matter how many times the cardinals bore witness to it, they still were utterly shattered and overcome with pain, guilt and sorrow, watching the line of their very gods being married to the Sorcerer King's servant. Ainz Ooal's unmoving face still grinned brightly as he left the depiction of nature and society, one of Nazarick's now 12 world items, The loop he created came at the cost of one free use of Wish Upon a Star, but it was eternal. Just like the world-class item the Cardinals were now in, well guarded, they would suffer an eternity, reliving the most humiliating defeat over and over again. With the strongest godkin, Rufus, the Black Scripture, and the Doppel Cardinals on his side, Ainz would now rule the Slane Theocracy from the shadows, until Nea had finished converting them to his own worship. The very moment he would be hailed as Soshana Reborn would be the day Ainz would revisit the Cardinals to introduce a second loop memory to them. At a certain floor, Nurenist blushed as she stood before a gigantic stone covering half an acre of land. This colleague of hers always knew how to compliment her looks and choice of clothing, sometimes even her non-existing hairstyle. The now flattered torturer was happy to return this kindness by throwing a gift to the one that moved the gigantic rock covering his lair. It was a reward handpicked by Ainz Ooal himself, now freed from mind control after he had confessed his plans for the Twin Floor Guardians, but otherwise broken, cursed, drained, and under the perpetual paralysis spell, the former Elf King watched in horror as the pitch-black void he had been thrown into beamed with pulsating violet-blue light emitted by the bioluminescent tentacles of one of the 5 worst. And with that said, Atlantis what could happen if scenario. Now, while Ainz could have simply crushed the Theocracy with his overwhelming might, something that the Great Tomb of Nezarec actually did during the events of the Evil Eye bonus volume, I found this way of taking revenge far more elegant, plausible, and devious. So Zesshi and Sheltie would be happily married, while the Cardinals would watch the wedding over and over for eternity. The scriptures would now serve him, and Slane would come to worship him, which pretty much is the ultimate form of revenge Ainz could take for them controlling Sheltie. The only thing that had surprised him was that they didn't need to put Zesshi under mind control. And now it's your turn. What do you think about my scenario? Do you find it plausible or not? Let me know all about it down in the comment section. And with that said, I say thank you very much for watching, and special thanks to Erder Daddy Erder, Badger Ye, Bad Burrito 316, Bezer, Ben C, Brandon D, Chrissy, Crowley 0221, Sia, Crystal Prime, Dead Slime, Death is Mercy, Deathless Dragonlord, Demon Xenomorph 1987, Devin Downen, Ding Dong, Duckwagon, Dystopia, Dystopia II, Enigmatic Unicorn, Feral Shivan, Guy with Dead Head, Hector Marino, Hoss, Huster, Jacob G, Jana B, Jason, J. Morris, Chromius, Kyle R, Legendarius, Lelouch Free Britannia with a Mustache, Lexus Fox, Lord Nishikian Rai, Lord Touch Me, Mervek, Mr. Shoes, Mr. Tweaker, Michael R, Michael Y, Nope, Oh Hell No, Normal Toad, O'Kill, Overlord General Gasper, Paddy Pentum, Personage, Primus 11, Q Necaricos P, Shergox's Daddy, Shadow Lightning Wolf, Shrine Keeper, Super Tier Magic Batista Bomb, Supreme Cheese, Staris, Ted, Texas Deer, The Orc War Boss, Rock Ed Smasher, T.E. Wang, Vashokai, Vegito 27, Venture Fanatic, Wilhelm, Xenukai, and Zonagon. Thanks guys. Anyway, have a nice day, and I hope to see you all again soon under my next video.